Hi everyone, this is Kyle Cardoza from ITI 664. I'm going to be presenting some information about my research topic, as well as the progress that I've made over the last 2 months in terms of research and going along with my thesis paper. So as you can see, the title of my topic and the title of my thesis paper, Universal Design for Learning, Optimizing Academic Vocabulary. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with Universal Design for Learning, if you've been going through National, I'm sure you've heard it quite a bit because they kind of hammer us with it to make sure that we use it, especially if you're a new teacher. But it's a relatively new framework, and it's really was built for accommodating the different needs or variety of needs for each individual student, no matter what grade level, no matter what background or funds of knowledge that the student has, and it should be utilized within all class environments. And in this case, I'm going to be talking about how you can utilize Universal Design for Learning, or at least my research was focused on using strategies from this framework for academic vocabulary for English language learners. So a little bit about myself and my professional background before I get started. I went to UCLA for 4 years out of high school. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in history and a bachelor's degree in communication studies. While I previously wanted to embark on a career in sports journalism, that did not work out for me. But I do and have always have had a passion for education, which is why I definitely felt comfortable going down this new route. And I'm a new teacher, which I'll get to in a second, and I would not, take my experience back by any means. I thought that it was appropriate to put that I have passed 3 different sets of CSETs. So before obtaining my current intern position at Washington Union High School as an English instructor, I had previously was kind of looking for any position, and I felt that since I was relatively new to the education realm, that having more CSETs passed would benefit me. So I'm hoping that in the future, since I have the CSETs passed for the social science, that I can obtain an additional credential or an authorization so that I could teach it in the future. And as you can see here, I don't technically have my credential yet. I'm still working on that. Excuse me. But I am currently an intern at Washington Union High School, which is also my alma mater. So it's been exciting to return there and see a lot of familiar faces and really build that connection with students because, I was in their shoes once. And I do currently teach English. Last semester, I primarily taught 10th graders. This semester, it has been 10th and 12th graders, which has been extremely fun so far, I must say. So going back to my research topic and why I chose this topic. So again, I wanted to focus on enhancing academic vocabulary through universal design for learning. And at Washington Union High School, we have a large Hispanic population. So a lot of students come from a background where their parents or their guardians or siblings solely speak Spanish. And so they grew up in a household where they really only were able to use Spanish and did not have very much exposure to English. And because of that, a lot of students enter our district not having known very much English, and hence, once they get into high school, approximately 24% of our students are considered or are labeled as an English language learner. So I felt that, if I'm going to continue teaching within this district and especially at this high school, it's really important for me to become educated on, how I can help English language learners develop their English skills. And after doing a little bit of research throughout my, first 8 or 9 classes in the credential program, I realized just how important academic vocabulary was. And even one of my professors had mentioned, the main reason for an achievement gap between English language learners and native English speakers is that vocabulary gap that there is. And I'm going to be honest, I think it is present and that it needs to be acknowledged. And therefore, I felt, okay, academic vocabulary is something that we definitely need to put at the forefront of English language learners' education, and then becoming more educated in this field altogether. I stumbled across Universal Design for Learning and have tried to incorporate that in my own classroom, and I felt, okay, there's not really that much research on Universal Design for Learning that I've come across, other than books that have been published. But in terms of excuse me, but in terms of like scholarly journals, I rarely come across anything regarding Universal Design for Learning when it comes to academic vocabulary. And a lot of teachers have used a variety of these strategies that you'll see in the UDL framework, but they don't necessarily label it in that way. And so for me, I felt it would be important to kind of review previous research, take some of the ideas that I've noticed that differ from the so-called traditional strategies or instruction for academic vocabulary, and see how that benefits English language learners. Not only with the multiple modalities that you see with the multiple means of representation in Universal Design for Learning, but also the multiple means of engagement and the multiple means of action and expression. And for those of you that do not know what Universal Design for Learning is, I would recommend that you check it out on the CAST website. That's CAST. And I apologize if I did not provide a basic understanding or a basic description of it, but that's solely because I believe that you all are familiar with Universal Design for Learning. So some of the research questions that I sort of built throughout my research, or to at least guide my research. The essential question that I have is, okay, how can the guidelines of Universal Design for Learning be used to enhance ELL's comprehension of and use of academic vocabulary? So if I go back, I think I did mention that academic vocabulary, there are multiple tiers. And tier 2 is the main, vocabulary for academic vocabulary. So that is what my focus is for this research. And my central question is really focusing on, okay, can these strategies, these guidelines that you can find on the UDL framework, the website, which has, it has basically 3 columns focusing on each different category. And you can see that throughout my paper and my research, my thesis. But how can we basically transfer this knowledge into the classroom, into the learning environment, to help students understand and even use, whether it's in writing or whether it's in speaking, academic vocabulary? Some of the additional questions are, what specific strategies are found to be most engaging when having students collaborate during vocabulary activities? What specific academic needs do English language learners have that teachers can address using UDL? And then there are 2 more questions that I'm going to explain before I really talk about how it connects to the data points or the data collection. The third question, in what ways can instructors incorporate multiple modalities, so auditory, visual, written, in their vocabulary lessons to deepen students' understandings of unknown words? And in what ways can teachers modify English language learners' assessment to provide equitable opportunities to demonstrate their academic vocabulary knowledge? So again, we want to build on the foundation that is academic vocabulary for these students. Just thinking about it earlier today actually, before you can walk, you have to crawl. And before you can run, you have to walk. And I think in this situation, academic vocabulary and people's comfortability in using it kind of align with that sort of metaphor, or I guess that is a metaphor for the walk. Before you can walk, you have to crawl, etc. But in this case, Now I want to connect it to my data points. So, how am I going to be able to measure whether students are able to understand and use it in a learning environment? And in this case, I'm going to, one, get information from the teachers that are teaching it. You know, not all teachers at my high school are aware of universal design for learning, so they not only have to be educated on it, but they also have to utilize it or incorporate it into their own classrooms and see whether it makes a difference. Is it different, or does it create any differences in engagement? So that is definitely one of the data collection points, because that's going to help me understand that additional question one: which strategies are most engaging for students? The next thing is, do they think it was effective? So that's another thing that comes from the teachers themselves, and that comes through a teacher interview. Do they think that the strategies were effective in any way? Does it basically, are they used to meet the needs of these specific English language learners? And then the additional questions, you can also, or sorry, the additional questions are also answered by instructors. So, do the instructors think that it was effective in each of the three different categories? So, multiple means of representation. So, do they think it was effective in terms of using separate modalities or multiple modalities in their lessons? As well as, do they think that the assessment scores were improved because of the ability to modify the assessments based on the UDL guidelines? And then finally, going back to my previous slide, do you think that the lessons were more engaging? So that is all going to be answered by a teacher interview. The second thing is that, especially with engagement, I really think that student feedback is invaluable, and I like to use it not only in my classroom because I think it's important, but just in education altogether. And so I created a student survey that definitely helps me understand, okay, do students think that these strategies were a little bit more effective than, say, like a traditional instruction style for vocabulary? And in my research, I definitely explain the differences between the two. But not only that, do the students think that it is more engaging? Did they find themselves participating more in these lessons or in these activities if they were placed in groups or in partners or even in a whole class discussion? Was there a difference between using that traditional style of learning, giving students maybe a list of words where they look up definitions and try to remember definitions, and then at the end of the week, just testing them on those definitions? That is basically, at least to my understanding, how traditional instruction for vocabulary has been before, there's been this transition into more equitable opportunities for students based on their, like I said earlier, the variety of their needs. So that is basically, so again, we have the teacher interviews, the student surveys, and then we have the assessment scores. So that is ultimately going to determine, again, that central question. Are students' understanding and comprehension and usage of academic vocabulary improving because of these different strategies? And you're really going to compare it, and I'll explain that in a little bit, how I'm going to compare the two. And I apologize for going back and forth between my slides. I know it can be a little bit confusing, I suppose. Okay, so this just kind of aligns with what I just mentioned. So the teacher, instructor interviews, and surveys. So all eight English teachers at Washington Union High School are going to participate, and that includes the ELD specialist. So basically, all of the English language learners will have an opportunity to take part in this study, because at my school, they will all have at least, they will all be in one English class in each semester. So we should be able to measure their understanding of academic vocabulary in all of their English classes. So that is how I plan on obtaining this data. So the teachers, all eight of the teachers will take part in this, because they will all have at least a few groups of English language learners in their classes throughout each day. There will also be the student surveys, as I said, because they're going to compare the engagement levels in traditional as compared to the UDL strategies. And then the student assessments. So there's going to be formative assessments and summative assessments that are going to be looked at, and we can organize the data afterwards at the end of the 5-month period, which is at the end of the semester, and kind of compare their scores with the traditional instruction versus the UDL instruction. Some of the resources that I used in my critical friend experience. So I'm not sure if Professor Gold or Dr. Gold knows this, I would assume, but in the previous class, we did not have critical friends, unfortunately, because I thought that was something in 660 that I really enjoyed. But the critical friend suggestions that I received in my 660 course were to obtain more recent research. So research from the last 10 years, just because, the more recent research that we can analyze and examine, that's going to be more helpful for us. And then not only that, but try to find a foundational research or a framework for guidance. So I know because I incorporate UDL that I have to use the UDL, guidelines or framework as guidance, but also from that academic vocabulary, area of this research, I need to find something that explains what traditional academic vocabulary instruction is and how that has changed, or what strategies have worked per se. So hopefully you can definitely see that within my paper, and hopefully that's pretty clear and apparent. The main resources that I used were what were recommended by the librarian, and unfortunately I can't remember her name. I think Barbara Stillwell, if I'm correct, but she had definitely recommended EBSCOhost. So a lot of my sources are from EBSCOhost, but I also use JSTOR. And unfortunately, Mrs. Stillwell suggested that we do not use JSTOR during her presentation, but I found a lot of great resources on JSTOR, and a lot of them were even within the last 10 years. So I felt that it was really useful for me. And other people in this class may have had a different experience with JSTOR, but I personally prefer JSTOR to EBSCOhost just because there's a lot of research that has been done within the United States, whereas in EBSCOhost I saw a lot which was useful, so to speak, from other countries, but I wanted to have a focus on the United States because, obviously I am going to be teaching in California, and I wanted to see, hopefully I could come across some research that was done in California or within some of the school districts throughout the state. But overall, I had a very positive experience with my critical friend, and hope to continue to have a positive experience and look at the feedback during this course. Okay, so the methodology, and this is where it's going to get really complex. Hopefully I can kind of explain it and clarify things as I go along. But basically what I'm hoping to do is, okay, so the first month of a 5-month plan. And this 5-month plan basically represents one full semester in my school district, or at least my high school. So in August, during that first month, I want to have a collaboration among learning directors and English teachers that are going to participate to basically decide as a group, okay, what strategies can we use that are considered traditional or stuff that we've already used before? And this is really without implementing UDL strategies or guidelines. And come up with some traditional or modify the strategies or the lessons that they already use, and really categorize that as traditional, and then come up with or create or continue to utilize or modify UDL strategies. So I really want to ultimately kind of create a playbook of traditional academic vocabulary strategies and lessons, and then strategies and lessons based on the UDL framework. And I know that that seems kind of like a lot to do in 1 month, but I think with the resources and the time and the effort that it can be done. And then in month 2 and 3, so the first month would be August, the second and third month, I should say, September and October. During those 2 months, the teachers are going to implement what are deemed the traditional strategies for academic vocabulary for English language learners. And, in this case, it would pretty much be for the entire classroom since, that would make it a little bit easier. But of course, for this class, we want to focus on the English language learners. So that first 2 months, or sorry, the second and third month, all of the teachers are going to incorporate these strategies into their instruction. And then, and I'll get to kind of when the surveys take place in a second. But in order to make sure that there are no confounding variables based on a teacher's experience and based on their own lesson plan and their own strategies, I felt that if all of the teachers use these strategies, these same strategies, we know that, okay, even if one of the teachers, say in the past has had better success in the classroom than, say, a new teacher, because there is a variety of experience, a range of experience, I should say, at my high school. I felt that coming up with these different strategies and teaching them kind of to the T would really eliminate any of those outlying variables. And so in that fourth and fifth month, so looking at November and December, the teachers will implement the UDL strategies. So there should be an equal amount of time to present or implement both strategies in academic vocabulary for these classes, for all of the classes. Okay, so then after each of the instructional periods, after each of the 2-month periods, teachers will partake in an interview and discuss the effectiveness of the strategy. So after that traditional instruction period, the teachers will take part in an interview. They will answer specific questions related to each of the categories of, UDL, and then we will be able to, take those scores that come from the interview. There's going to be questions on a scale of 1 to 4. We will take those scores, we will average them, and kind of see, how well these traditional strategies did compared to the UDL strategies. And at the end of our research, we can see, okay, obviously there's a significant difference between one or the other, or maybe, there's not that much of a difference. Hopefully it would be there is a statistically significant difference. That is what is anticipated. After each month, because the first instructional period will be traditional, after that first month, students will complete a survey to confirm sort of the engagement level. But not only that, it'll be, were the lessons a little bit more enjoyable? Did you find yourselves participating in more of the lessons? And did they find it, less challenging or less difficult? So that is going to be what is done after each month. And these students, they will have the same survey across the board. That way they have, that way they can at least have, some recollection of what they did and the strategies that were used or the lessons that were performed in the classroom after each month. Because if I had them do the survey at the end of the whole research period, they would likely have forgotten everything that was done early on, in those first 2 months. And then finally, looking at the formative and summative assessment scores for each of the activities. Now, this seems this seems quite a bit. This seems like a lot of data to gather. But again, with time and effort, I think that it could be done. And I think it's important to not only look at the formative assessments, not only the summative assessments, but the formative as well, to see, okay, is there a difference between the multiple means of action and expression for the formative assessments and the summative assessments or whatnot? Or is there no difference in that? So ultimately, again, we're going to hear from the teachers, we're going to hear from the students themselves, and then we're going to actually see if their knowledge or comprehension has improved using different types of strategies, and in this case, UDL. So a couple of things that I would really tell myself, and this is something that I hope to continue to do research on, because I want to continue to do research about on a multiple. Sorry, I want to continue to do research on multiple different pieces of content or multiple different research questions, not only with English language learners, but just in education in general. Because education is, the information is endless. So you can continue to do research for as long as you'd like. So in this case, I want to tell myself, okay, for future research, consider the methodology sooner. I felt that when I was going through the methodology, I felt that I was rushing myself and that I was really coming across a lot of obstacles that I, at the time, could not necessarily get through. Because, when you consider methodologies, you have to consider all of the confounding variables that could really mess up your research. And so in this case, for me, I found myself switching. Okay, do I want to get information from students? Maybe I should observe them. Maybe I should ask them one-on-one or have an interview with those students. Maybe I should just get information from the teachers and then look at the assessment scores. So not only that, but then kind of looking at the logistics of everything, trying to see, okay, am I giving a certain amount of time, or, am I giving enough time for each of the different strategies, the traditional versus the UDL. So I think just in the future, considering this methodology and having kind of a rough draft in my head, okay, once I get to the methodology, here's how it will go. And I know that I didn't really consider it before the literature review. And so maybe in the future, I can at least think about it or jot down some important points that I want to consider before really diving into the previous research. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I was able to obtain some sort of foundational sources on UDL and academic vocabulary, but I feel like books definitely are useful because, they provide a published resource of sometimes 200 to 300 pages. So if I could find one of those on academic vocabulary or whatever topic that I want to do research on in the future, finding a few of those books to act as foundational sources, because those are what I would consider secondary sources and something that I can either challenge with my own research or sort of support or bolster if I do agree with them and feel that information is definitely helpful for future educational purposes. And then finally, and I apologize for some of the things, the transitions that I've had, but finally, getting into my future aspirations. So not only do I hope to utilize this knowledge in the classroom, incorporating UDL strategies more often, and I've been doing that throughout these last couple of months, especially when it comes to vocabulary. And I told myself this second semester, I really want to focus on vocabulary because the English language learners in my last semester classes definitely suffered from my lack of, attention to academic vocabulary and that gap that does exist. And so this semester, I really told myself that a top priority was going to be vocabulary and finding ways to, use those multiple modalities, using auditory, using visual implementations into my lesson. So I think that is definitely something that I hope to continue to use and continue to augment those strategies throughout my, experience or tenure as a teacher. And then eventually, with this master's, maybe I will even consider adding an additional master in education. But eventually, I want to get into administration because I am extremely passionate about education. And just in my short time as a teacher, I've already noticed some things that, if I was an administrator in their position, some things would be done differently. And not to say that my administration team doesn't do a great job, because they do, and they do provide a lot of support for their teachers. I just think there's always going to be room for improvement. And while, obviously we can't shoot for perfection, there's always going to be something that is sort of imperfect about any situation. We can at least strive to, meet the needs of all students and provide equitable opportunities for all of them, no matter what funds of knowledge they have, no matter what backgrounds they come from, and no matter what, socioeconomic area they are from, or basically what high school they go to, or what school they go to in general. So I'm hoping that at some point in the future, after doing additional research, after doing my fair share of, I guess, my own education or self-education about becoming an administrator, hopefully I will eventually obtain an administration credential and obtain a position as an administrator in a school district within Fresno, California, or at least in a surrounding area. So that is basically my research. I appreciate everyone watching this video, and hopefully if you have any questions for me, then please feel free to reach out to me. If I don't have an answer right now, I can definitely do research and get back to you. So I appreciate everyone's time, and I look forward to hearing from everyone in the class. So take care, everyone.